Welcome to the debut episode of First Five Live. I'm Freedom Forum Fellow Leza Knott, and First Five Live is a new conversation series featuring activists and influencers sharing their stories about how they have exercised the five freedoms of the First Amendment: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition to enact change. The Freedom Forum's mission is to foster First Amendment freedoms for all, and it works to raise awareness of First Amendment freedoms through education, advocacy, and action, sharing the stories of Americans who have exercised their rights to ignite change. And today we are very pleased to talk with Lauren Leander, an Arizona nurse who works in a coronavirus intensive care unit. Lauren exercised her First Amendment rights by holding a counter-protest in support of healthcare workers and patients at a rally to reopen Arizona. Last month, hundreds of people gathered at the state capitol in Phoenix to protest Governor Doug Ducey's stay-at-home order enacted to stop the spread of the virus. Leander, wearing a face mask and her hospital scrubs, stood her arms crossed in defiance of the protesters. And she said that she intended her silent message to support the importance of staying home in the name of public safety. Please welcome Lauren Leander.
Hi, everybody. Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And also very good timing too, because as you told me, it's actually National Nurses Week, which begins each year on May 6th and ends on May 12th. I think that's like Florence Nightingale's birthday, right? Is that why?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's her 200th birthday this coming 12th of the month.
Oh, wow. So everybody, National Nurses Week, appreciate nurses even more than you do now, because you guys are just doing an amazing job, and it's nice that you actually have a week that recognizes that. And actually, I read that you volunteered to work in your hospital's COVID-19 unit when the pandemic began. Can you tell me about that decision and what the experience has been?
Sure, yeah. So when we started preparing for the influx of COVID patients, we knew we were going to have to cohort the patients together away from the other, uninfected patients in the hospital. And so in that way, it requires us to work on units that are full of COVID positive patients. And so they were looking for volunteers who were willing to work there full time. A lot of nurses don't have the luxury that I do of living alone and, not having to worry about bringing the virus home to young kids or to elderly adults. So, being able to sort of self-isolate in my own home, I had a really unique chance to step up and be there for my coworkers and my hospital in that way. And that's, me and a lot of other nurses have made that decision. So over the last 2 months, going on 2 months now, I've been working full-time in the critical care department for COVID patients.
Wow. How has that been?
Two parts to it. I think we just never would have imagined that we'd be working the front lines of a worldwide pandemic. It's just sort of kind of raised the bar of nursing and how we've had to reinvent ourselves and figure out new ways of caring for our patients in a safe and efficient way. So in that sense, it's really challenged us as a profession to look outside the box and figure out how else we can step up for our patients. And on the other hand, it's been emotionally really difficult. And when I say these things, I speak on behalf of every other coworker or every other healthcare worker that's going through this, but I haven't hugged anyone. I haven't seen my family in 2 months. It's just been difficult having my work shifts being the only sort of social interaction that I have outside of, being at home. So emotionally, it's been tough. We've seen a lot of struggle in very new ways in the hospital as well, seeing patients, alone without family members at the bedside, having to go through this ordeal on their own or solely with the nurses and doctors at their bedside. So from a lot of different angles, it's been a really difficult situation.
I can't imagine how tough that should be, especially for some reason that just really hits me that you haven't hugged anybody in 2 months, and just it's hard. And I'm sure you've been there for your patients, and everyone's going through such a time, but it's great to have you guys on the front line doing this. And I mean, speaking of your patients' interests, I know that part of the reason why you said you went to counter-protest at the Capitol was because you wanted to represent your patients. And as a First Amendment organization, we've received a lot of questions in the past few weeks about whether stay-at-home orders and orders that limit assembly, whether they're actually constitutional. our answer to that is that right now most of them are. States have the right to pass reasonable regulations to protect public health, as long as it's the least restrictive way to protect the public health. And so, what it went through your head when you heard that there was going to be a Patriot Day rally to urge Arizona to lift that stay-at-home order? What were you thinking?
You know, it really felt like our state was sort of trying to undo all the hard work that we've been doing. You know, all the hard work that people have put in to stay home and to self-isolate in many ways. You know, gathering by the thousands with no masks, going against stay-at-home orders and pushing to open our state before our governor has deemed it ready to be done, is just not the approach that any of us healthcare workers would take, or nothing that it's not what we would want for us as a whole. And so it was disheartening to see this movement sort of snowball and start to pick up strength. And we'd seen the healthcare workers in Denver sort of go viral for a little while with the couple photos where they stood in silent protest against those same people. And so it kind of just, you know, a light bulb went off in us, and we thought that's how we could take a stand with this. That's how we could show up as healthcare workers and somehow sort of be louder, ironically, than all the misinformation and fear that's been going on.
And, you know, what's interesting is that in some states you have anti-quarantine protesters who are clearly violating their state's orders. And so they're either lawbreakers or practicing civil disobedience, depending on how you look at it, what your point of view is. But Arizona, I know, had an exemption for people engaging in First Amendment activities. So that could cover the protesters, but it also covered you and your fellow nurses doing the counter-protest. And what you said, that you showed up to be louder, ironically, because you chose to protest silently. What was your thought process there when you decided to stage this silent protest in front of the other protesters?
I think we had to be really careful about how we approached this, because we knew everybody was very heated, and obviously they're going through their own struggles. Their frustrations and their struggles are no less important than ours. And so we weren't there to tell them that they were wrong or to tell them that their struggles don't matter. We were really there to just be a placeholder for our patients, because we know if our patients could have been there that day with us, they would have, and they would be doing the same thing, urging protesters to stay home and follow those orders that are in place. So for us, silence was our best defense. And I think when we truly felt the tension in the air and how kind of on the verge of near aggression or near violence people were, we knew that it was the best choice for us to stand and stay silent. And ironically, people took one look at us and felt that they knew exactly why we were there and who we were and what we were doing. So it gave us a good chance to bear witness to what other people had to say. You know, we knew we didn't have anything to defend as healthcare workers. We hadn't done anything wrong. So we got to just sit there and say, you know, I see you. Tell me what you have to say. Like, I'm listening. I'm right here.
Wow. What did they have to say? What did they think you were doing there? What was the reaction?
We picked up on a lot of different themes that came up. I think the biggest one is that people thought we were fake actors. They thought we were paid to stand there in costume, that we were probably planted there by the government or by our hospitals. Nobody really seemed to believe that we were real healthcare workers at all, and that was why we weren't choosing to speak to anybody, is we didn't want to blow that cover, or, you know, something like that. So that was the biggest one, is people just didn't think we were real. Other people were just angry. I think just angry and frustrated. You know, why do you get to have a job and I don't? Why do you get to stand there and get paid and I don't? So, you know, there were a lot of different aspects to the perspectives that people brought to this protest, but I think, you know, nobody hesitated to step right up and tell us how they felt. Nobody hesitated to step right into our comfort zone, 1 to 2 feet away from us, not social distancing, and tell us how they felt. And I think the media covered pieces of the sort of verbal things that were being thrown at us, but we also got coughed on. People would walk by and cough at us and tell us they were coughing the fake virus on us. There were people who were trying to bait us away by saying, oh, if you're a real nurse, there's someone over there that needs help. Like, you better go help them. And we walked over there to see what was going on, and somebody was, laughing at us. So it was difficult to feel like the enemy or to feel a bit like a punching bag that day. I don't think we felt that before.
Was there ever a moment where you felt legitimately frightened to be there?
We could feel tension sort of escalating as people started walking towards the Capitol. We felt really lucky that there were DPS officers behind us that were stationed, directly behind us to make sure we were safe and that nobody, got too close or anything like that. But I would say I had a moment where I realized how many people were openly carrying firearms. And that hadn't really dawned on me until I was in the thick of it and was surrounded by hundreds, over 1,000 people, and realized how many guns were just everywhere. And I felt frightened when I noticed a group of men. They were completely masked, carrying assault rifles, and clearly using it as an intimidation factor or something. But coming up and posing with us, they're strapped with ammo. We just realized the fragile nature of the situation we were in, and that truly that silence was going to be our best defense. And we realized that one wrong move or one push too far could have resulted in something unfortunate. So yeah, there was a little bit of fear there.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think it just highlights just how powerful and bold silence can be as a protest tactic. That just your presence there, you didn't have signs, but you were clearly nurses, and you were clearly standing in opposition of the protesters. That's such a powerful message. And there's an image that we just saw that was taken by Arizona Republic photographer Michael Chow, I believe. It's been shared online and picked up by a lot of news outlets. I think we're going to see it again, but you are, you're just there standing in your scrubs with this person with an American flag, waving it right in front of you. And there's you seem you told me that you did feel some fear, but you seem completely unintimidated. Did you know in that moment that there was a photograph being taken, and that it might grow viral and it would sort of be this photograph circulated in the press?
Not at all. We were in the thick of the protest at that moment, and this was when everyone was crossing the road all at once by the hundreds to try to plant themselves in front of the Capitol. And that's when I realized I knew we needed to be seen. We needed to be heard, and I wasn't going to let them walk by us and not notice us. So that I had no idea anyone was taking photos, but that was the moment that we rearranged ourselves and planted ourselves in the middle of the crowd as they were walking past. So I don't remember this man. There are flags everywhere. I remember being there, obviously, but it was quite a whirlwind in that moment.
And just to have that image captured, you never know at the moment what's going to end up being the takeaway. But I think that was a great choice just to get your message across to people who were observing the protest and were trying to kind of make up their minds about how they felt about it. Because you did see why the protesters were there. There's a lot of frustration about having the economy closed, but it just occurs to me that as a nurse, you have a totally different perspective of this pandemic than the rest of us, than a lot of us who we see the effects on our daily lives. We don't really see the impact on patients like you do. And I mean, if you were to basically tell your message to those protesters, what would you want to say to them?
I think we were there to do what nurses do best, which is to be an advocate for the people who couldn't be there that day. And so those are our patients that are in our ICUs right now who are alone and struggling and very sick. And I think there's been a lot of the media has focused on the empty beds in the hospital and the amount of ventilators we still have left over and how we're not quite at capacity. And they've shown a light on all the empty spaces in the hospital. But what they haven't seen are the 3 overflow units that I work in every day that are completely full of patients. And we're adding to it every day that are the sickest, most unstable, gravely ill humans that I have taken care of ever. And so not only to show them that side of it, but to also advocate for the vulnerable populations I've spoken about, the Navajo Nation, the homeless, the people going through chemotherapy treatment right now, the ones who will be affected if we opened Arizona in an unsafe manner. And there's a lot of people who this virus, it hasn't peaked for them yet. Their fight has just begun, and it's going to be something that we are still dealing with for likely years to come.
And you mentioned those vulnerable populations. You and your fellow nurses have started a GoFundMe page for the Navajo Nation. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So being the biggest ICU in the state of Arizona, we receive patients from all across the state and even neighboring states. And so we have a good feel for our community and who's been hit the worst, and how these patients present depending on their pre-existing conditions and things like that. And a very large majority of our patients right now are Navajo, and are being flown in and airlifted away from their homelands and their families into my ICU. And a lot of them don't know if they're ever going to see their families again or see their homeland again. And a lot of them aren't. And we have had entire families, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, grandmas, grandpas, flown to our hospital, and they're separated from each other, obviously in isolated rooms. And it's weighed heavy on our heart how much Navajo Nation has suffered. And they've been hit third worst per capita in the entire country, right behind New York and New Jersey. And so I think it's wonderful that the media is starting to give them a bit of the spotlight as well, because they are just beginning their fight with this virus. And so we really wanted to just take the momentum of this movement, and people have been so generous in wanting to help that yeah, we opened a GoFundMe, and we are nearing on $70,000 at the moment.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's oh, and I believe that there is a link being shared to the GoFundMe page in the chat section now. So anyone who's watching who wants to contribute, I think that's a great thing to do with, now that the media's attention has been on you and your fellow nurses, just to share it with some of your patients who need the most help. That's great. And just when it comes to how the state's operating now, I understand that Governor Ducey extended the stay-at-home order till May 15th, but he's also decided to reopen certain things maybe a bit earlier than people thought, like restaurants will have dine-in capability on Monday. Is that right?
I think so, yes. Yeah. It's been a little confusing for all of us, just kind of hearing the stay-at-home orders change and fluctuate. But yes, I believe so. I think that's where we stand.
What are your thoughts on that? And if there was a message that you could convey to the government or the general public, what would it be?
I think that as Arizona starts to find a new normal and to open back up, I just ask that they please don't forget about us. I think as people go back to restaurants and have dinners and go to sporting events again and try to find some sense of normalcy, I don't want them to forget that this fight is not over for us, because as healthcare workers and patients, we are going to sit back and watch our world go back to a new normal while our lives do not. While I continue to fight COVID on the front lines every day with my healthcare workers, I continue to self-isolate. I continue to not be able to see my family. So as people move forward in this new normal, I ask that they still find ways to fight alongside us and wear your masks in grocery stores and wash your hands and limit your gatherings and social distance as much as you can, and just to not forget about us and still fight with us side by side, however that may be.
No, that is such an important message. One of the things that we've been saying is that when you might have the right to do certain things, especially as like these orders lift and when there's exemptions made for certain activities, but you do need to think of it also in terms of responsibility,
Yeah.
Just because you can doesn't mean that you necessarily always should. And I think that's good to keep in mind, that life might be returning to normal for some people, but especially for healthcare workers, it's going to take a while. And when it comes to you and your fellow healthcare workers, I thought what was interesting about your presence at the protest was that a lot of people were saying that you were not nurses, and that after the rally, former Arizona Senator Kelly Ward tweeted that you were actors. And what was your reaction to that?
I mean, just disbelief, I guess, because to have the few gals of us that were there be so true well-intentioned with why we were there and who we were, and to just be as bare-boned as we were, like you said, with no posters, no nothing. The masks were not even part of costume either. Those were our protection, because we knew these people were not going to be social distancing or not have masks on of their own. It's disheartening to know that there are leaders of my home state, where I've grown up and lived my whole life, who can in some ways look me in the eyes and still tell me that what I did was not real or not true. It's unbelievable.
Right. And to just given all the hard work that you've been doing these past few months, that's hard. And I've asked you what message you'd want to send to protesters or to the government or to everybody, but what about specifically like your fellow nurses and healthcare personnel across the country who are fighting COVID-19?
Oh gosh, just that we're in this thing together. I think that social media has been a wonderful way to for us to get together as healthcare workers and just show support for each other. We know that this fight is not near over and will go on for some time, and just to tell them that I'm with them. I stood for them. We all stood for them. They were all with me side by side that day, just shoulder to shoulder with us at the Capitol. And I think obviously there's been a lot of tragedy surrounding the ER doctor who committed suicide and the other healthcare workers who have been struggling with mental health instability during this time. And I don't think that's something that we address nearly at all. You know, as frontline workers, we sort of have these micro traumas, as we can call them. Like every day we see a little bit of trauma in some sense or another, and it can kind of sit in us and build within us. And so I hope that this is a way for us to check in with each other and check in with ourselves, and take care of ourselves as well the best that we can.
That's really powerful. And just, you know, just that you were there at this, to counter protest, and, you know, not every healthcare worker could be, but in a way you feel like you were there on their behalf, right?
Oh yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel blessed to be able to represent so many people who are struggling right alongside with me. I just feel blessed to be able to speak for them.
I think it's also important that you had people at the Capitol, and they were protesting, as you said. They've got their frustrations, their desire for Arizona to reopen, and just the fact that you guys were there meant that there was like another message and another perspective on it. And it's just, I think it's just really good for both the public and the government to be aware of those different things when they're making those decisions. Mm-hmm. And so it's just great that you guys were able to organize and show up. And I did ask you this before, and I'm going to ask you this again. Given everything, and I know since it looks like Arizona is opening up, there might not be another rally like that, but if there were one, would you do it again? Would you counter protest again?
That's a really good question. So there was another rally. It was almost 2 weeks from our initial event. So that would have been, I think, last Sunday. There was another rally. They had speakers there. They had, I think, almost twice the amount of people. It was quite large. They had the same idea. They went to the Capitol and stood in protest, because that was initially when Governor Ducey had extended the stay-at-home orders for another 2 weeks, and so I think it really riled people up again. So I, alongside the nurses who were with me, kind of tossed around the idea of what does that look like if we go to another protest? What would be the benefit of being there, and would we be successful as much as we were the first time? And, you know, we decided that there's a good amount of these protesters whose minds we're not going to change. We're not going to be able to change them. And so the GoFundMe was actually our counter protest the second time around. We all went live on our social media accounts and announced the GoFundMe at 12 noon at the same time that the protest was going on again.
That's great. And I think that's something that, like, as our organization has been saying, for a lot of people, it's not safe to go out and assemble, but there's still ways that you can politically organize without doing that. And just using those online tools and social media, like you said, that can be invaluable. And again, we shared the link to the GoFundMe page. Your mother's Sandy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she shared the link in the chat, so that's great. Everybody can look that up and hopefully visit the page. We have a question. Did you or your colleagues hear any message from the protesters that you didn't know of prior to your counter protest?
You know, I think that just the biggest shock to us was how many people thought that the virus is a hoax completely. I mean, they must have made up a very large majority of the people there. That was probably what shocked us the most, is that there were people that looked us straight in the eyes and said fake virus, fake nurses, hoax, paid actors. That was the biggest shock. And we just had to sit there and listen to it. And that was obviously the biggest shock, because we couldn't be more real and we couldn't be more invested in this pandemic as healthcare workers. That was probably the most shocking.
Right. And when it comes to like misinformation, have you noticed a lot of that about the pandemic?
Yeah, a lot of people just thinking that, okay, maybe there is a virus, but it's really not that bad, or it's just really not, people aren't really that sick. Like, they see people that recover from COVID, oh, they're fine. It's, it's no big deal. But this virus doesn't discriminate at all. We have people from all walks of life in our ICU, from my age, up to my parents' age, like young people that have really no pre-existing health conditions, that are critically ill, that come in all the time. So, that was the piece that was frustrating for us as well, is that the virus is very real and is very serious for those in our ICUs.
So, I mean, this is actually just something that I personally wonder, where do you go to get the best information, given that it just seems like things change so fast?
That's a really good question. I mean, we do look to our leaders like Governor Ducey to give us, rely on science to give us the best recommendations for, do we open up, do we not, do we socially distance, do we not? And so really just looking for those experts and those people whose job it is to study disease and study how this thing can transpire. And yeah, just being careful in who we listen to and why, and what their intentions are, and what their background is.
I mean, that's good advice for pretty much any kind of information you're seeking out, right? COVID included. And after this experience, which have you ever joined in a protest before? Or is this one of the first ones that you've been a part of, or is this like a common practice for you?
Oh gosh, no. It's so funny. My mom and I joke about how my teachers and all my report cards growing up said, we love Lauren, but she's so quiet. We just wish she'd participate more. And, we love her, but she's so quiet. So no, this was not, I've never done anything like this before. Not at all.
Oh, pretty good for your first one then. That's fantastic.
Yeah, not so bad.
Have you given a lot of thought to the First Amendment before? Just given that most people don't really think about the First Amendment on a day-to-day basis. So I was just wondering, like, is that something that entered your mind, that like, I have the right to do this, or,
I'm going to honestly say no. I think it felt like the right thing to do. And again, we were inspired by the coworkers in Denver who did that and did exercise their First Amendment. And so it just felt right. It just felt like, we knew we weren't going to be there to stir the pot or rile people up or be aggressive in any way. So we knew that our intentions were pure, and it just felt like the right thing to do.
Yeah, just to be there and be able to send that message. That's great. And that's actually a question that we got in advance was, your protest was silent. If you could have held up a sign to send those protesters a message, what would it have said?
Help me, help you.
Oh, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
I think we are just about out of time, but thank you so much for, I know this is like one of your few days off, so thank you for taking it to just share your story with our viewers. It's just truly inspiring about what protest can do and like how you can get your message across. So thank you. And on behalf of the Freedom Forum, thank you everybody who's here for joining us for our very first 5 Live. And stay tuned for upcoming programs at freedomforum.org, where we will feature diverse voices and viewpoints on First Amendment freedoms. And finally, we would like to hear from you guys, your views on the First Amendment focus of today's show, the role of protest and free speech in debate over government response to COVID-19. So to join this discussion, please use the hashtag First 5 Live. And Lauren, thank you again for being our very first Five Live guest.
Happy to do it. And yeah, on behalf of me and the coworkers who protested with me that day, we thank you guys for supporting us.